Alrighty, it's time for my next section of Didn't Make the Cut, which are details that didn't make it into my sermons. And this one is for the sermon that I did on culture shock, and I talked about the story of the Israelites getting out of Egypt. And there were a couple of details that had to do with names that sometimes I think people are interested in. But like I said, they just didn't fit into the flow of the sermon. And one is, I mentioned when I was reading that I was making reference to the Reed Sea, which people are used to being referred to as the Red Sea, the crossing of the Red Sea, but now we talk about it as being the Reed Sea. And what we're dealing with here is a change in how translation has been understood. Basically what happened, the word in Hebrew that they're talking about is Yom Suf, which means closer to Reed Sea than to Red Sea. But what happened was when the Septuagint was translated, which was the translation of the Hebrew text into Greek before, in the late years of the BCs, they changed Yam Suf to Eruthra Thalassa, which made Reed Sea into Red Sea. Eruthra is the word for red. So somehow that got mixed up, and maybe it was because they knew of a Red Sea that was in the area around where the Suez Canal is now. It's dried up. But we're not actually totally sure where the people crossed. Oftentimes it is understood as that lake that was in the area by where the Suez Canal is, and that stretch between the Arabian Peninsula and Africa. But there's also been projected that it was a lake that was attached to the Nile River, and that one was known to be reedy. So if they were talking about the Reed Sea, then maybe that was more accurate. There's also some question about whether Yam Suf means to be Reed Sea, or if it means to make reference to Sufa, which would be the Sea of Storms. And in that case, it would just be that sort of dramatic appearance of God and the storm that occurred that set the Israelites free. Or if it's meant to be Yam Soph, which would be the end, the Sea of the End, which certainly the Egyptians came to their end there, and the end of slavery occurred at that space. So with an ancient text, a lot of times things just don't get translated very clearly, and we're not 100% sure what they're talking about. And especially when you translate from one language to the next, which happened when we went from Hebrew to Greek, and then now we've gone sometimes Greek to Latin, Latin to English. Sometimes we went back to the original Hebrew as much as we can. It's tough sometimes to figure out exactly what happened. But regardless, the people crossed something in a very dramatic way, whether it was the Reed Sea, the Red Sea, the Sea of Storms, or the Sea of the End. They crossed. The other name thing that I thought, this is just a thing that I find interesting, and that is the fact that they come to the water that is known, to the place known as Mara, and the water was bitter. And a nice tie-in to this story happens in the book of Ruth when Naomi has lost so much. She's lost her son, she's lost her husband, and she says she feels cursed, and she says, "Call me Mara, don't call me Naomi, because I am bitter." And it recalls not just that moment for her and all that she's struggling with, but sort of recalls that early struggle trying to reach the promised land. And in many ways, that's what Naomi was trying to do, was find her way again when she felt completely lost, and that the world had sort of turned against her. So it's a nice way for us to remember that the people of God periodically run into times of bitterness, but that God is bringing us out and bringing us to the promised land one way or the other. Okay, so that's my behind the scenes for the Culture Shock sermon dealing with honeymoon and homesickness. Look forward next week to one dealing with hostility and humor. Take care.